Hello everyone, welcome to Naren Life with MS. This is Naren and welcome to the 250th video on this channel. So of course, this is amazing news and of course I'm very excited. So much so that I am literally giving a double feature on this Friday Findings episode, which means you're not getting you're getting not one, not two, not even three, but four different articles. And these four articles are actually very interesting. Almost all of them are actually featuring certain studies that were conducted. And of course, the rest is up to you to decide how helpful all of this information might be to you. But of course, all of these stories do seem very interesting. All of them, and weirdly enough, I normally do not get this many stories showing up on a new week, but it just so happened that there were four very new stories that were available. So of course we are starting with the four stories, but of course with that said, I do hope you find any of these stories interesting. As always, all links to these articles will be available in the description section of this video, so you can definitely check them out. And without further ado, let's begin with article number 1. So starting off with article number 1, this article is actually discussing the start of a phase 2 trial for a medication that is targeting specifically progressive forms of MS, and it is called pegsebrenatide, something like that. So this article, this new medication that has been created has pretty much passed its phase 1 trial and now is going towards its phase 2 trial. This pegsebrenatide actually has been is actually on trial as well for other diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and alongside that it also is working on a slightly different way to pretty much provide the modification of the disease or diseases that it is trying to uh, target. So definitely this does seem very promising. I think the drug is also called NVY01, and alongside that it is one it definitely does do things that are slightly differently from the current sort of disease modifying therapies that are available. With this disease, the phase 2 trial starting, there are about 120 patients that have been picked to pretty much undergo two study be part of either one of two studies, one that is going to be given a placebo while the other is actually getting the medication. And the medication will be given to them weekly for about 96 weeks, which is almost 2 years. And this, alongside that, is also going to feature a subcutaneous injection, unlike a lot of the current very powerful DMTs, which are usually given intravenously. So that will mean that all of the patient that there might actually be a way to get this medication in a self injection sort of way. So that is of course something that is you can definitely look forward to. But of course, considering that this phase is just starting, I'm pretty sure there will be more information regarding this in either the very near or the very distant future. So be on the lookout for that. But that is pegsebrenatide, which is, of course, entering its phase 2 trial for progressive forms of multiple sclerosis. But of course, with that said, do share what your thoughts, what your insights, and if you've ever actually been involved in a drug trial, please do share your thoughts and your experiences on that, so that we can get a conversation started. And of course, do provide your opinions on what do you think this new medication is going to, um, you know, if how effective this new medication can be. So of course, with that said, that was article number 1. So let's get started with article number 2. And this article is very interesting because it is pretty much talking about two groups of people, both of which are of course diagnosed with MS, and there has been a strict difference in the way that they have received treatment. So now this article actually states that people with late onset multiple sclerosis or LOMS actually get less directed to disease modifying therapies than people with adult onset multiple sclerosis or AOMS. This, of course, means that people with LOMS, right? And when we're talking about late onset, we are talking about people who pretty much develop MS, or at least are diagnosed with MS between the ages of 50 and 55. Or at least that was what was considered in the study. And it was shown, or at least it was identified, that they definitely did receive much less of a push, or even much less of a start with a disease modifying therapy. Now I'm going to go into certain specifics as to which drugs LOMS patients were actually more prone to receiving versus drugs that they were less prone to actually you know pretty much prescribed. So if we're talking about medications that were more prescribed to LOMS patients, that was just one, which is Aubagio, right? We are talking about terifluramide, which is Aubagio. Now, what happens on the other side of the spectrum? Which drugs are actually a lot less prescribed? Well, we do have our fumarates. Now there are two medications over there, but I am just going to say one, which is Tecfidera, which is a lot less prescribed to patients with late onset multiple sclerosis. Apart from that, we also have our S1PR modulators, modifiers, which are more or less your once a day or twice a day pills that do give that are taken orally. And these ones, this set of medications will include Gilenya, Zeposia, Mayzent, and which is the last one? I had written all of them down, but actually I hadn't written them down. I just thought that it's going to be remembered by me. But yes, so we do have Zeposia, Gilenya, then we have Mayzent, and finally we have Ponvory. Yes, those are the 4 medications that also are less prescribed to patients with late onset multiple sclerosis. But of course, when we are talking about the lightest, the the you can almost say the least efficacy drugs, such as the interferons, beta-seron or Avonex, or even glatiramer acetate, Copaxone. These were almost equally prescribed to patients with AOMS and LOMS. What this is also finding is, what this study is also aiming to find is, how often patients were asked to, have follow-up appointments, which was more or less negligible between the two different groups. But of course, the biggest thing to note is that patients with LOMS were definitely less prescribed with a certain medication than patients with adult onset multiple sclerosis, which of course you can take to however you want. But of course, this is somewhat puzzling, considering that all patients should be treated equally. But of course, when we are looking at certain lifestyles that patients with LOMS versus patients with AOMS might have, there is a certain there are certain factors that also come into play, which definitely will give rise to doctors realizing that certain medications are probably not very will not be very helpful, especially when prescribing to a patient with LOMS versus a patient with AOMS. So that, of course, is the second study that I wanted to cover. But please give your thoughts, your insights, your opinions, and of course your experiences as well, especially if you are someone who actually might have been in either category, right, an AOMS or an LOMS. I was slightly earlier than the AOMS range, considering I was 16 at that point. So I don't know what kinds of what kinds of if there's a study available for the group that I am involved in. But this of course is something very interesting to check out, and definitely will give you a lot of insight on how patients of multiple sclerosis are pretty much prescribed with their DMT. So that was article number 2. On to article number 3. Now I know this is uncharted territory, but yes, there is a third article, and this article discusses a study that is still very preliminary, but it actually shows, or at least gives some indication to what might result in more women having MS than men, right? Usually the ratio between women and men having MS is 3-1, so it's definitely predominantly it is a condition that predominantly affects women. But as you can tell with me, that it isn't something that only affects women. So where does this come in? So this study pretty much covered what can actually happen in MS, and what the researchers did with this study was they collected the cerebrospinal fluid, which is the fluid that actually is what the brain and the spinal cord is suspended in, and pretty much identify that all of the proteins that are present in women, both with MS and without MS. And one thing that they found is that with women who have MS, there were 72 proteins that were actually higher than for women without MS. So 72 proteins that were in higher quantities, and then 46 different proteins that were actually in lower quantity for women with MS versus for women without MS. Now, what were some of these proteins? Proteins that were slightly at a higher frequency, at a higher concentration, included things such as um, the proteins that actually can help immune systems to be a little more active, to kill more, to kill more, alien matter or infections or anything like bacteria. But of course, on the other side, there were definitely proteins that were in lower quantity, and these were the proteins such as which were the communication proteins, especially when we are talking about the signals that go on between two different um, the different electrical signals that happen between two different neurons. So that was something that was a little less. But of course, there was another thing that did show, that did end up showing, which was there was a less um, there was actually less concentration or less frequency of certain sex hormone proteins that were present. And one thing that actually was shown was that this sex hormone protein that would pretty much attach itself to either the sex hormones of men and women, testosterone or progesterone or estrogen, um, you know, there was a higher likelihood of it actually impacting the female sex hormones than the male sex hormones, pretty much giving a very preliminary attention to the fact that yes, women are more likely to actually have MS as opposed to men. And of course, one thing that was noticed was that it was slightly different in terms of how um, this impact on the different sex hormones was actually affecting the different sexes. And as a result, you do definitely have slight changes in between what women may experience with MS versus what men may experience with MS. So again, this is a very preliminary study. So of course, further studies should happen on this, because if there is a certain conclusion that can be reached, especially in regards to um, why women get MS more often than men, it will definitely get us a lot further in actually answering the question to there actually being a cure or a certain treatment for MS that can work for both men and women. So that was article number 3. We are finally at article number 4, and now this article number 4 is actually a little closely related to article 3, because this is more focused on women, but it actually shows that there may be a non-invasive procedure available that can actually showcase if how quick or how active the nerve damage actually is. So this was actually done through collecting samples of menstrual fluid from tampons, and what this menstrual fluid showed was it had the presence of a certain agent called NFL, or neuro something filament you'll just have to read the article. But essentially, this when menstrual fluid was actually collected from these tampons, and the presence of this NFL protein um, was present, and this protein was actually present in 98 of the 99 different samples that were taken. It actually showed NFL was seen as an indicator of nerve damage actually occurring in all of the patients. Now, considering that this was taken from a process that only that more happens with females rather than males, this might be something that is pretty much done only for women or anyone who menstruates. And another thing but the one thing that is obviously very apparent is that MS impacts many more women than it impacts men. So if there is a non-invasive um, procedure, or not even procedure but a non-invasive form to pretty much understand how rapid or how slow the progression of a disease is because of the presence of a certain protein in menstrual fluid, then it should definitely be a much faster way of being able to detect um, the progression of MS in patients, essentially. This, of course, is another study that it's actually a lot more thoroughly conducted. And considering that the alternative to this study just involves processes such as invasive procedures, right? We are talking about spinal taps, we are talking about many blood tests, or even conducting MRIs, everything that is a little more expensive versus something that can be taken from something that is already naturally occurring. It definitely shows that there are ways to pretty much lower the cost of understanding how fast a disease is progressing in a majority of patients. So this, of course, is an amazing study, and I do implore you to read this entire study, and as they say, save the best for last. And I do believe that this is something that should definitely be checked out. So yes, please do read this study, especially do give in your thoughts, your insights, um, even your experiences on this. And of course, with that said, this has been article number 4. So we are now back, and I do want to know what you thought about all of these 4 articles that I have shared, and what are your thoughts on any of these things that are happening, right? As I stated in the intro of this video, all 4 of these are studies that have been conducted at multiple stages at and also occurring of multiple different sizes in terms of the number of patients that were actually involved, right? We are talking about studies that had just that just had 6 people that were actually studied against other other much larger studies that were conducted. So of course, do share your thoughts on all of these 4 um, studies that did happen. Do share again your insights, your experiences, and of course the whole point of this is to get a conversation started. But of course, with that said, considering it is Friday, I do hope you have a lot of great things planned for your weekend. And of course, apart from you know understanding everything that you have planned for your weekend, I do hope that you have made some time, or you are planning some time to actually get the rest that you need so that you can tackle next week a lot better and with a lot more energy, essentially. But of course, with all of that said, this is Nareen Saif with MS. I am Nareen, and here's wishing you a good night, sweet dreams. I will talk to you tomorrow, and of course, a happy weekend. Bye.